G'day, welcome back. In today's episode, Iran erupts against Islam and the Ayatollah is on his last legs. Anthony Albanese has succumbed to pressure to call for a royal commission into the events of Bondi. Is this actually going to be a real royal commission? Or is this just a facade in order to take pressure off him? And finally, we take a quick look into Victoria, the fires, the sinkholes, and the sprinklers. All that and more on the Mark Pirotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Pirotta Show.
Two quick stories before we get into the main topics for today. The promoter behind Candace Owens' bid to come to Australia has entered liquidation. Candace Owens was refused a visa to come to Australia by Tony Burke based on the fact that she was a risk in some way, shape or form to Australia. Despite the fact that we allow ISIS brides to return, Candace, who I disagree with on many issues, was not allowed to come to this country. That comes along with Kanye and several other high-profile acts who have shown cases of anti-Semitism in the past. Now, as I've stated multiple times, I don't agree with censorship in any form of any type. If you are not explicitly calling for violence, you ought not be censured or silenced in this country. You ought to be monitored as a result of your speech, not told that you cannot say it because it might hurt someone's feelings. The issue that I find with this story is that it turns out that despite Candace Owens' visa not being approved and the fact that she was never going to be allowed to come here, she has never refunded the tickets insofar as the reporting is saying. That is to say that for the last 12 months, since her visa was cancelled, people's tickets, which probably were reaching into the hundreds of dollars to go and watch Candace Owens, have not been refunded. In a statement, Tony Burke has stated that as soon as the decision was made, he said that he has hoped that she had a good refund policy. And then has stated that Candace Owens has even treated her own supporters with contempt. They are the latest addition to a long list of people her business model manages to offend. Now, I don't know when we became so soft as a population that offense somehow meant that your voice had to be silenced. As a general rule of thumb, iron sharpens iron. You create diamonds under pressure. And a general lack of consensus means that you can be in a battle of ideas in order to get to an ultimate truth. When you start censoring people, you start avoiding controversial topics, you stifle progress because you do not know what you do not know. Someone might have a good idea that you just have not thought of yet. And so if you are stifling conversation, you are stifling ideas. On that thread, Palestinian Australian academic has been removed as a guest and a guest speaker on multiple panels from the Adelaide Writers' Festival. Now, this woman, Randa Abdel Fattah, is no saint, but she is intellectual. She is very well read, very well written. She has been writing for the better part of 2 decades. She has been on Q&A. She has been on Sky News. She has been a thinker and a speaker in this space for a very, very long time. Now, I understand with the current pressures on anti-Semitism, everything, even political speech, is considered anti-Semitic. But when you start to silence these voices, you start to radicalize these voices. To an extent, she's already been radicalized. Just take a look at the image she posted directly after, if not during, the October 7th massacre. This is an image shared by Drew Pavlo. So this is Randa Abdel Fattah. As you can see, on the 8th of October 2023, updating her cover photo to display a paratrooper with a emboldened Palestinian flag the day after / the day of the October 7th attacks. And a Sky News interview that was conducted shortly after the attacks, Erin Molan, who was at that point doing panels for Sky News, lambasted her for this and got into what could only be described as a heated shouting match, at least from Erin Molan's side, demanding that Randa Abdel Fattah denounces Hamas, calls them a terrorist organization, and denounces the actions of October 7th. Now, what she did do is denounce some of the actions of October 7th, but she never outright called Hamas a terrorist organization, and she never outright denounced Hamas. She continued to claim that it was simply an act of rebellion against the genocidal mania that was Israel, the apartheid state. And in several other statements since has come out and called specifically for the destruction of Israel. Not in so many words, but in saying that there can only truly be a one-state solution. And in saying there can only be a one-state solution, while you are vowing for only one side of a conflict, it indicates that you mean to eradicate the entire state of Israel. Now, I haven't really shared too many of my views on Israel on here, because I don't necessarily believe that I'm an expert on the issue. But as it stands in my mind, if you're the kind of person who can look back in history and pretend as though the grievances of the past are your own grievances too, then you are the kind of person who does not belong in a media culture, let alone in polite society. The grievances of the past should be left in the past. We ought to learn from them. But to sit around and say that we have to look back in history and adjust the current modern climate, both economic, social, and in this case, geographical, in order to right the wrongs of our grandfathers and their fathers before them. If we continue to go back and back and back, how do we end up with an actual solution? Because at some point, your ancestors probably enslaved the Jews, and at some point, the ancestors of their ancestors probably enslaved your peoples. And so you can no longer write history, and history was never written, and the stories will just be made up as a consequence. I'm not a fan of this in any way, shape, or form, specifically because she's not just a Palestinian activist. At the end of the day, she's also a mother of 4 children. She is an Australian. She has a perspective. She is a well-published author. And whether you like her or dislike her politics, specifically when it comes to Israel, it is not the right of anyone to silence speech simply because it is speech that you do not like. I do not like the idea of getting rid of comments, specifically comment sections from politicians, and I don't like silencing voices, especially that I disagree with. I don't want to silence you, I want to change your mind. And how can I change anyone's mind if I don't know what they're thinking because they're too afraid to say it for fear of being put in jail? That, to me, seems like the way that societies fail. If a sector of the population is not allowed to speak their mind, we are going to end up in a situation where the only way that they can achieve what they want to achieve is not through speech, but through violence. In light of that, let's dig into Iran. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please do's is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. A country that has been so devoid of free speech, so devoid of justice for its population for such a long time, that they have taken to the streets that they are revolting against the regime that has oppressed them for the better part of 50 years. Ayatollah Khomeini came in at a time in Iran that seemed politically necessary for the country. But as history has shown time and time again, every time Islam and Islamists are allowed to enter a political sphere and create a theocracy based upon their religion, the only thing that follows is death, persecution, and the general decline of society until that society fails. And then it revolts, and once it revolts, the persecution really begins. At this stage, something along the lines of 50 people's lives have already been lost after mass protests have hit the streets in Iran. Protests have erupted in 31 Iranian provinces. This started from anger over the inflation and the currency collapse that has occurred since December of last year. There are now demands and calls for the end of the Islamic Republic after the exiled Reza Pahlavi called for the people to take to the streets less than 18 hours ago. For those who do not know, Reza Pahlavi is the son of the last king or ruler of Iran, who in 1979 was deposed from his position, effectively under the exact same conditions that we're seeing today, but for different reasons. There was economic decline due to a very serious amount of corruption, but there was also a general discontent with the way that Iran was coming closer and closer and closer with the United States. With the prevalence of television and radio within Iran, many of its citizens had started to become westernized. The general Islamic consensus in the country was that that was not something that was allowed to happen, and so the Ayatollah stepped in through military force, deposed who was then the Shah, which is the king of Iran, and then installed what is now commonly known as the IRGC. In that amount of time, they have built a funding arm that funds Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, along with many other small terror groups across the region. They have been a radicalizing, destabilizing force in the Middle East for the better part of 50 years. And while, for the most part, avoiding the US's eye, have been a force for terror without real compare. But when it comes to Iran and the people rising up themselves, it is almost a play-by-play of what Donald Trump had called for when he bombed the nuclear sites in the middle of last year, after the 12-day war that left the majority of the country's oil, energy, and nuclear facilities decimated. Let's take a listen to Donald Trump's take on what is happening at the moment in Iran.
Following the protesting that is taking place all over the country of Iran
Yeah,
now.
I'm following it very
And
closely.
have you read that the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has a plan B to go to Russia?
Or someplace, yeah. He's looking to go someplace.
Do you believe that
It's getting very
Iran,
bad.
you think the country is on the verge of collapsing?
Well, it could be. I mean, what they've done is in the past, they've started shooting the hell out of people, and all of a sudden people without any weapons whatsoever are standing there and you have machine guns gunning them down, or they take them to prisons and then hang them and kill them. So they played rough, and I said, if they do that, we're going to hit them very hard. We're going to hit them hard. We're ready to do it. If they do that, we're going to hit them hard.
Are you?
New reporting that has come out has stated that the Ayatollah has in fact fled to Russia at this stage. Now, what are some of the lessons that we as Australians can learn from this? The very first one, Islam has no place in our parliament. Islam, or Islamists as a general rule of thumb, are not congruent with secular, modern societies. You cannot live in a world that is dictated by a religion that preaches the hatred of neighbor the general disdain for anyone who is not a part of your religion, higher taxes for those who are not a part of your religion, the forced morality of women, the two-tier system when it comes to equality between the genders, and equality in the real sense, that is to say, parity on a moral and social level, and pretend as though you can maintain a Christian Western nation under those parameters. It is not possible. Now, I know that Anthony Albanese did not swear upon the Bible when he was placed back into the seat of Prime Minister for this term. But the basis of our Constitution is that it relies on the blessing of Almighty God. Almighty God being the Christian God, we ought to maintain that in the back of our minds. And though we are, by principle, a secular nation when it comes to the ability to create laws, insofar as we base our laws upon the morality of the people and the judgment of the people, not upon the judgment of the Bible, when these laws were created, they were made in the same way that it is written inside of some of the letters from the American founding fathers, that they are made with the intention and only and wholly for a religious and moral people. Now, religious at the time of the founding of many of these Western nations was only Christian. Islam was effectively withheld to the region of the Ottoman Empire, from which Palestine and Iran both hail. And as such, Christendom was the majority religion within the developed world at the time. And so all of these texts, all of these incredible systems of governance were built under the premise that we were held to a moral authority by God, not by man. It's one of the major reasons that we see such failures in the modern Western system, because while we set up our governance structures, insofar as you may choose what your religion is, and you may choose in some way, shape, or form how it is that you choose to live your life. You do not need to go to church every Sunday. We recommend that you do, but you don't have to. The texts were written for a system under the rule of a people who had a shared vision for what that nation ought to believe from a moral perspective. As such, this is proof in the pudding that Islam is not compatible with the political structure of the West. If you hold Islamic beliefs, in my opinion, and this is simply in my opinion, you ought to have to denounce them in order to become a member within the parliament, within any Western government. It does not seem feasible to me that you can simultaneously hold the structural laws in your mind of your faith that is not congruent with the faith that built that nation, and simultaneously serve as a member within the parliament. And yes, I understand that we are a representative democracy, but because the moral structures are so separated from what it was that built these countries, it doesn't seem possible to me that you can hold both views at once, that you can be a Muslim and represent a people who have a governing structure that is built upon the premise of Christianity. Iran proves that. Iran, for many who do not know, initially was a Christian nation. When Islam spread throughout the Middle East, effectively from the late 6th and 7th centuries, and the takeover that happened through Muhammad decimated the Christian world. From then on, it has been to and fro between several different dominating powers. But as a general rule of thumb, the peoples who live in that place, while Muslim, are now far more influenced by those like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, who hold secular governmental structures with a religious peoples underneath them. And that religious peoples dictates the morality of the nation. And so you can see the beheadings still exist. Okay? There is still subjugation of the lesser class in their mind, which is the woman, through the use of the burqa. And many of them want to wear it. Again, do not get me wrong, but when it is forced morality, it is not morality. It is indoctrination. And at the end of the day, it is abuse. Forcing anyone to do anything is problematic. Let's pray for the people of Iran that the general consensus of peace continues. Let's pray that the Ayatollah sees the light of day, is given some form of revelation that destroying what is left of his reputation and his soul by condemning his own people to death under military rule will not be the best way for him to go out, and that he ought to resign his post and allow for a new government to take place that can lead Iran back to a land that was once so successful, so rich, and so beautiful. Let's move on to our next topic. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has backflipped big time on a royal commission. Not only did he bypass his own cabinet and not mention to them that he was coming out to announce this royal commission, not only did he install Virginia Bell, who by every stretch of every imagination was about the most left-wing person that they could have picked, he has also put in a time limit on how long this royal commission can take. And guess why? We've spoken about this several times before. It is not so much that Anthony Albanese did not want this because it would not cause social cohesion, that it would disrupt unity. None of those things mattered. They were all smokescreens for the real reasoning. And the real reasoning was this. A general royal commission goes for between 2 years and 3 years. The exact amount of time between the last election and the next election. As such, what Anthony Albanese has done is that he has forced this royal commission to only last for 11 months. We are talking about a royal commission into the greatest tragedy that this country has ever seen. Because many people point to Hobart, to Port Arthur. But that tragedy didn't have reason. It did not have motive. What is the most visceral part of any true crime podcast? It's the why. You want to know why. Why did something happen? When it came to Port Arthur, that massacre was without a doubt terrible and worse by the death toll. But there was no rhyme or reason. It was psychosis wrapped in a gun. This had motive. This was visceral. This was in the heart of what it is to be an Australian. It was in the heart of the biggest state, and it was in the heart of what the world recognizes as Australia. Our culture mixes on Bondi in a way that it doesn't anywhere else in Australia. And so, for him to come out and put a time limit on what could be the largest scale investigation into both anti-Semitism, radical Islam, and radical ideology in this country shows to me that he is more worried about his political tenure than he is about the safety of the Australian population. You cannot convince me otherwise. Why else would you put a time limit on it? Nothing else makes sense. Australians have a very short memory. A very short memory. People don't even remember how divisive the Voice to Parliament vote was. After that Voice to Parliament vote, which saw him and his ideology lose in a swing 60-40, a vote majority larger than what he won the election by, people still decided to vote for Anthony Albanese and the government that wasted $500 million in order to force us to vote for something that would create two nations within the same nation, that would create another pandering group of human beings that would pretend as though they speak for 260 nations across the entirety of Australia, a group of 10 individuals who would just pocket a butt ton of money in the same way that most of these middlemen Indigenous groups always tend to do. And under the same breath, we still voted this man in. Why? Because the only thing that was on people's minds at the time of our election was Donald Trump and the tariffs he was imposing on Australia. Because we only see this far. We can't remember all the terrible things that have been done to us by a political government. We only see what is happening at that time. And so for Anthony Albanese, the only thing that makes sense for his political career is to ensure that there is 18 months between when this reporting comes out and when he next has to sit for an election. Because by the time the report comes out, which has to come out on the 14th of December, because he thought he was doing something there by creating some sort of memory hole for the Australian people just to remember the 14th of December. It's exactly 1 year after. What he's really doing is bypassing his responsibility to the safety of Australians in order to ensure that he still has a shot at being elected in the next election. Let's listen to some reporting from 9 News.
Head on into an about face. The Prime Minister commits Australia's highest level of investigation into the Bondi massacre.
It's clear to me that a Royal Commission is essential to achieving this.
The Commonwealth Royal Commission will be led by former High Court Judge Virginia Bell. The focus, tackling anti-Semitism and investigating key drivers, improving law and immigration enforcement, examining the circumstances surrounding the Bondi attack, and any other recommendations to help social cohesion and prevent radical religious extremism.
It does.
Where I struggle with this is that nowhere inside of the Royal Commission, nowhere inside of the points, and the way that a Royal Commission works is that the government effectively dictates the terms of the Royal Commission. That is to say, it creates the scope of what the Royal Commission ought to look at. And so, as a general rule of thumb, in the same way that the Governor-General is selected by the Prime Minister, they can effectively have a lackey. Now, in the past, most of the people who have been selected have been independent, non-ideological, middle-of-the-road kind of people. In this case, Virginia Bell is anything but. Virginia Bell is an LGBTQ activist who leans left. And so it is going to be incentivized for both her and Anthony Albanese to ensure that the logic that comes out of this is going to end up being something that fits within their agenda, which means any money she is going to spend more time investigating extreme right-wing neo-Nazi views than she is going to spend actually digging into what caused this. Notice the wording. They're not investigating the Bondi attack. They're investigating the events surrounding the Bondi attack. Okay? They are not investigating radical Islamic extremism. They are examining radical religious extremism. They are not digging into the how and why this happened. They are digging into social cohesion. That is to say that this is going to be a sham. I would love to see if at the end of this I am proven wrong, but I seriously doubt it. So far, everything Anthony Albanese has done in regards to this has been a lie. He said that he'd spoken to Jewish leaders and Jewish community and the victims. So far, most of the people who have come out have said that he hasn't. He said that he spoke to the cabinet and the party. They literally had a row today in Parliament between the Labor MPs saying, "You never came and spoke to us about this." He came out and said as if it was his idea that it is essential in order to have a royal commission when he spent the better part of 3 weeks ensuring that it did not happen and pretending that we did not need one because New South Wales was going to do one. This is not going to end well. If anything, it's going to end out worse for the Australian population. Why? Because it's going to tell lies and half-truths. And that is one of the major issues when it comes to Labor. They are the lowest self-accountability government in human history. They do not take accountability for any of their flaws. They spin everything, they redefine terms, and then they'll say racism, and then they'll say social cohesion, and then they'll say, oh, right-wing extremism, but they will not name this for what it is. Radical Islam growing in our country as a consequence of our soft politics, our soft morality, and our lack of an Australian identity. Now, I did not agree with Edward Schuller when he spoke to me about the Australian identity being ethnic, and I still do not. But the Australian identity is uniquely Christian, in the same way that America's is, that England's is, that much of Europe is, that pretty much every nation that has some sort of first worldness about them is based upon Christian principles. We've allowed those principles to fall through the cracks. We've allowed ourselves to become shy of who we are. And we have allowed ourselves now to be in a situation where we can be overrun by these sorts of ideologies because they are simply stronger than ours. Let's take a quick listen into Josh Frydenberg's reaction to the Royal Commission, and then we'll dig into the Victoria fires.
Which culminated in Australia's deadliest terrorist attack. This announcement of a Royal Commission could have happened earlier. It should have happened earlier, but only because of the overwhelming weight of public opinion. Tens of thousands of Australians from every walk of life, from every corner of the nation, started to call on the Prime Minister to announce a Royal Commission, recognising that while the Bondi attack was one that targeted the Jewish community, it was actually a threat to every Australian. And I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister and his government have now relented and made this announcement.
Victoria has gone through some of the hardest times, and it's still in the midst of them. Now, first thing that we will say when we get into this segment is that we hope and pray that every single person inside of Victoria is safe. At this stage, it seems as though there are a family who are at this stage missing, who were known to be in the midst of the fire at the time and could not escape and were told to seek shelter. And upon returning, their family home was destroyed. It is still too dangerous for authorities to actually enter the property, but we hope and pray that they are safe at this stage and that they did actually find shelter. Let's dig into some of the clips, some of the news clips, and see some of the footage that has come out from those fires at this time.
Interstate due to how large scale these fires are. Now, yesterday in Victoria, we did have a slight reprieve from the heat, but that has done little to ease this fire. Today, temperatures just a few hours ago were tops of 44 degrees. We're really seeing these wind gusts come through here in Seymour. But here was the Deputy Mayor speaking a short time ago.
It frightens the living daylights out of me. It is a beast. Do not try and outrun it. Do not try and dictate it. Don't try and predict it, because it will beat you every day of the week. This is the worst I've seen it, and it's heartbreaking, but it's also terrifying because we don't know what's going to happen. The next 24 hours is really watch, wait, see.
Now, what causes these fires? What is it about Victoria specifically that continues to allow these sorts of raging fires to exist? It has always puzzled me that as far as bushfires go, they exist across the continent, right? Australia is a place where fires can happen anywhere for any reason. And so I don't necessarily think that even if we did our utmost, we could entirely stop them. But Victoria specifically has an issue with fire. They also happen to have the most Green senators. They also happen to have some of the largest native restriction when it comes to back burning. They also happen to have some of the largest pockets of native land and traditional title land. And so as far as their ability to actually maintain the national parks, the large forests. They are one of the states with the most restrictive ability to actually clear, maintain, and ensure that the homes and the people and the citizenry of Victoria are safe. Because to a large extent, many of the people who are in charge of the government there prioritize plants over people. Now, I'm not saying the politicians are to blame for this fire. Australia is a land of fire. That's been true since we've been here, since before we've been here, and for hundreds of thousands of years. We can see it in the sediment. We can hear it in the Aboriginal stories. Fire has been a part of what it is to be an Australian from its inception. But as the Australian population spreads further and further into bushland as the population grows, we need to find a proper solution to ensure that people come before plants. We can't say that's a native tree and so you can't chop it down. That is not a feasible solution to a growing population. So what has Victoria done over the course of the last few years in order to ensure that their population is safe? From what we can see, almost nothing. If anything, it's gone backwards. So far under this Labor government, we have seen a reduction and a deprioritisation of funding for hazard reduction. Budgets have increasingly favoured emergency response and administration and post-disaster recovery over front-end prevention. Underfunding of rural land management capacity, resources for maintaining public bushland, clearing fire breaks, managing roadside vegetation, and reduced fuel loads have not kept up pace with land growth, population expansion, or fire risks. Funding has shifted away from local and volunteer capability, while spending has drifted towards centralised bureaucratic structures. And the one that bugs me the most, because I've actually called for this several times now, token funding for cultural and preventative programs. We give billions, and Victoria specifically gives billions each year to Indigenous programs. What are some of the things that Indigenous people are physically and mentally, culturally better at than the average Australian? Fire management. It is one of the highlights of what Indigenous culture produced in their time. Indigenous culture had one of the best fire management systems of any culture. They'd lived here for 60,000 years. It was something that was passed down generation to generation in order to ensure that the lands that provided them food would be maintained from fire. Their land clearing is actually strewn throughout the land. You can see it in the land. They've got stories, songs about how to do it. But we do not empower our citizenry, specifically our Indigenous citizens, in order to allow them to do something that they are genetically programmed to do through years of adaptation. We would rather spend the entire time saying sorry in the same way that Victoria has done, and then paying for the I'm sorry by giving people money in the aftermath of a disaster, than pre-planning for something like this. It is one of the hallmarks of a bad governing structure when all you can do is react. It's the same thing we spoke about in the last episode or the episode before. It is very, very hard for a politician to do something new. It is better to do nothing in their eyes and then react and pretend as though you are the hero in a situation than to take on what Spider-Man, of all people, has said and say, when you have these powers and the bad things happen, then the bad things happen because of you. Now, you might not get credit because the bad things don't happen, but at the end of the day, you did what was morally right. Saving a tree is not congruent with saving lives. Giving people money after a disaster does not replace the memories that were built into that home. And pretending as though you are the hero because you stayed up till midnight does not mean that you are in any way, shape, or form someone who we should be proud of as a representative of our nation. Now, outside of the fires that are currently plaguing Victoria, we also saw over the course of the last few weeks, both a sinkhole that sprung up inside of a park in Victoria and the sprinklers going off because of the heat on a tunnel system that has just been built. Watch.
Tunnelling has been halted on Victoria's most expensive road project after a giant sinkhole opened up at a popular oval in Heidelberg.
Now, sporting teams are scrambling to find a new home, and neighbours are left to wonder if it could happen again underneath them.
At the Banyule Bears home ground, a huge sinkhole.
I meant to play Lower Eltham here on Saturday, so it's probably not going to happen now.
And it's created even bigger problems after the gaping hole opened last night, more than 7 metres wide, around 3 metres deep.
Wow.
Luckily, no one was training, but it stunned locals who cordoned the area themselves. By morning, the ground was fenced off with security and swarming with authorities.
And I'm sure there'll be lots of people having their bums kicked this morning, trying to figure out why it is that no one saw this coming.
$1.2 billion project simply couldn't handle the heat today. The inbound tunnel has been closed since just before 2 o'clock this afternoon when the sprinklers were activated. It's understood that a heat sensor was triggered because of today's hot conditions. Thinking there was a fire inside that tunnel, the state government has stressed there was in fact no fire and no threat to motorists using it, but they were forced to slam on the brakes on the outside of the tunnel when they saw water falling from its roof. It's only been open for just over 3 weeks. This is the first major issue it has faced. As we go to air tonight, there is still no traffic running through the inbound lanes of this tunnel. We were told by 6 o'clock that they should be running. We haven't seen that at this stage. So anyone heading from the west into the city is encouraged to use the Westgate Bridge and also Footscray Road. Brett.
And I think those three things pretty much sum up what has been the Andrews and Allen government. They're in the hole. They can't handle the heat. And the Labor Party in Victoria needs to be burnt to the ground and rebuilt. Just as a little side note, something that I read just before I got on the show today, Dan Andrews, there is currently an investigation that is going to be taking place into some historical crimes that may have been committed, historical corruption, as it relates to a car accident that he was involved in. Now, this has never really truly been investigated, and it has taken, seems to be some podcasters to get it across the line, with involvement from the police officer who was first called to the scene but then turned away. And it seems like they've got some new information that will be shared with the public tomorrow. Keep your eyes out for that. Outside of that, that is the show for today. As I've said, keep praying for the people of Victoria, keep praying for the people of Iran, and stop censoring people. Let people speak, let them speak their minds, and hopefully, at the end of it, we will see a better world because we had a chat instead of having to shut people down and pretend as though we achieved some sort of unity, when really, all we did is separate people to the extent that they could no longer talk to each other and build nations within nations. That'll do for the show today. My name is Mark Pirotta. Please ensure that you like, subscribe, comment, hit the little buttons everywhere. The more you click, the more engagement you give me, the more other people will be enticed as a consequence of the algorithm. So give me a hand. Thanks for listening, guys. I will speak to you all again on Tuesday. God bless.